You're traveling through the unknown, a journey beyond the corners of reality, where the shadows whisper and the chill runs deep. Welcome to the dimension where your deepest fears are given form. This is The Midnight Mystery.
Welcome to The Midnight Mystery. This episode is called The Cosmic Horror of US Route 50. In each episode, we delve into the shadowed corners of our existence, bringing you tales of the eerie, the uncanny, and the downright terrifying. From the realms of the supernatural to the depths of the human psyche, no stone is left unturned, no dark secret left hidden. As the clock once again draws near midnight, prepare to embark on another adventure into the uncanny, the eerie, the horrifying, the midnight mystery. Never been so excited about a road trip before. Mom had packed sandwiches, Dad was fussing with the GPS, and my sister Lucy was trying to convince Grandpa to play a game on her tablet. Grandpa just chuckled and said he preferred the windows view. US Route 50 stretched before us, a ribbon of possibility that seemed to stretch into forever. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a journey through landscapes as diverse as our own family. Grandpa was full of stories, and Mom and Dad seemed more relaxed than they'd been in months. "Everything buckled, kids?" Dad asked, adjusting his rearview mirror. "All set," Lucy cheered, while I simply nodded, a bit overwhelmed by it all. The car roared to life, and we were off, the world outside my window blurring into a mosaic of colors. Grandpa began one of his tales, something about ancient mountains and forgotten towns. I tried to listen, but my eyes were drawn to the horizon. There was something there, a dot, so small that you might miss it if you weren't looking right at it. But I was looking, and I saw it. "Look," I whispered, pointing, but no one heard me over Grandpa's voice, rich with enthusiasm for his own story. That dot, there was something wrong with it. It didn't move like it should, didn't behave like a distant car or an airplane. It was just there, waiting, watching. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us. "Dinner at a roadside diner, and then a motel for the night," Mom was saying, breaking into my thoughts. "Sound good, Henry?" I tore my eyes away from the window and tried to smile. "Sounds great, Mom." But my mind kept wandering back to that dot. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like it wasn't just part of the landscape. It was something else, something that didn't belong. The rest of the family laughed and talked, but I stayed quiet, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. As the miles rolled on, the dot seemed to linger, never quite fading from view. Was it getting bigger? Closer? My heart pounded in my chest, a drumbeat of fear that I couldn't understand. "Do you see that, Henry?" Grandpa asked suddenly, squinting into the distance. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "See what, Grandpa?" He frowned and shook his head. "Never mind. Just an old man's eyes playing tricks, I suppose." But I knew he'd seen it too. That dot, that wrong, impossible thing on the horizon. It was there, and I couldn't escape the feeling that it was coming for us. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for the car, and I closed my eyes, hoping that when I opened them again, the dot would be gone. But when I looked again, it was still there, waiting. The car's engine hummed a lullaby that did nothing to soothe me. I leaned back in my seat, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "Dad, do you see that?" I finally blurted out, unable to contain my curiosity and growing fear. "See what, sport?" Dad's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, meeting mine. I pointed again, my finger trembling slightly. "That thing. That dot. It's been there for hours." Mom twisted around in her seat, squinting at the horizon. Lucy did the same, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I don't see anything, Henry." "It's just a trick of the light," Dad said, smiling reassuringly. "Sometimes the way the sun hits the road can make it look like something's there when it isn't." "I don't think so," I said, my voice small. I glanced at Grandpa, who was staring out the window, his expression serious. "What do you think, Grandpa?" I asked, my voice wavering. Grandpa turned to look at me, his eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite name. "I'm not sure, Henry. It doesn't feel right." Lucy laughed, breaking the tension. "Grandpa, you and your feelings. It's probably just another car or a cloud or something." Mom joined in, trying to lighten the mood. I think Lucy's right. It's easy to see things on a long drive. But Grandpa didn't laugh. He kept staring at the horizon, his face pale. It's growing, he whispered, almost to himself. Growing and coming closer. A chill ran down my spine at his words. I looked back out the window, and my heart skipped a beat. The dot was bigger, more distinct. It wasn't an optical illusion. It was real, and it was coming towards us. Dad, it's getting closer, I cried, panic rising in my voice. Henry, calm down, Mom said, her voice soothing. It's just your imagination. You've been staring at it for too long. No, Mom, it's not my imagination. Look at it! The car went silent as everyone turned to look again. The dot had morphed into a dark mass, its shape shifting and twisting in ways that made no sense. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, a black void that seemed to suck in the light around it. I see it, Dad said finally, his voice tight. I don't know what it is, but I see it. Grandpa's hand closed around mine, his grip firm. It's not of this world, he said, his voice filled with a certainty that sent another wave of fear through me. It's something else. What do you mean, something else? Lucy asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, child, Grandpa said, his voice heavy with dread. But it's coming for us. We need to get off this road. The car was filled with the sound of our ragged breathing as we all stared at the dark mass, now clearly visible on the horizon. It was otherworldly, its movements unnatural and its very existence a contradiction to everything I knew. We'll find a place to stop, Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll figure this out. The desert around us began to shift and churn as we drove, a surreal dance of nature that was as beautiful as it was terrifying. Trees bent as though bowing to an unseen force, and animals darted across the road, fleeing from something they sensed but couldn't see. What's happening? Lucy asked, her voice high with fear. Grandpa was muttering under his breath, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the entity was growing larger, more distinct. It's awake. It knows we're here. It's causing all this? I asked, staring in disbelief as a tumbleweed twisted unnaturally in the air before being hurled against our car with a thud. Yes, Grandpa said, his voice grim. It's playing with us. Dad's hands were white on the steering wheel, his knuckles strained. I'll outrun it, he said, determination in his voice. I'll get us to safety. He pressed down on the gas, and the car surged forward, eating up the miles. But the cosmic being was relentless, its presence a suffocating weight that bore down on us. The weather turned strange, the sky darkening and the wind howling, a desert storm conjured from nowhere. Can't we call someone? Mom asked, her voice trembling. The police, the army, someone? Who would believe us? Grandpa replied, his eyes never leaving the entity. What could they do? The panic was a living thing in the car, feeding on our fear, growing with every mile. We were trapped, pursued by something that defied explanation, defied logic. We're not losing it, Dad shouted, his voice breaking. It's still coming. It's not bound by the laws of our world, Grandpa said, his voice filled with a terrible understanding. It doesn't obey our rules. It obeys its own. I looked back, and my blood ran cold. The entity was closer, its form a shifting, undulating mass that seemed to mock the very fabric of reality. It was a horror that had no place in our world, a terror that transcended understanding. We have to keep going, Mom said, her voice firm. We have to get away from it. We'll find a way, Dad promised, his voice filled with a determination that I knew was born of desperation. But as we drove, the road stretching endless before us, I knew that escape was a fantasy. The cosmic being was not just pursuing us, it was toying with us, bending the world to its will, showing us that we were helpless before its might. The landscape grew more barren as we sped on, a desolate wasteland that mirrored the growing despair in our hearts. Other cars had vanished from the road, the usual signs of life strangely absent. Where is everyone? Lucy whispered, her eyes wide and fearful. Maybe they've all seen it too, Mom replied, her voice hollow. Maybe they've all run away. Or maybe the entity had taken them, I thought, a chill running down my spine. We were alone, truly alone, with only each other to rely on. We have to get off the main road, Grandpa said suddenly, his voice firm. It's following us too easily. Where can we go? Dad asked, his voice desperate. How can we hide from it? We have to be unpredictable, Grandpa replied, his eyes thoughtful. We have to try to confuse it, lose it in a maze of smaller roads, old paths. Dad looked at him, uncertainty in his eyes. Can we outrun it? Can we outsmart it? We have to try, Grandpa said, his voice filled with a determination that seemed to galvanize us all. We have to fight back in the only way we can. Guided by Grandpa's wisdom and intuition, we abandoned the main road, turning onto an old, forgotten path that seemed to lead nowhere. The car jolted and bumped, the road rough and uncared for, but we pressed on, our hearts pounding with a mix of fear and hope. We can do this, Mom said, her voice filled with a fragile courage. We can survive this. We're strong, Lucy added, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. We're a family. We drove through the night, taking turns that seemed random and meaningless, but were guided by Grandpa's deep knowledge of the land and an understanding of the entity that seemed almost supernatural. We have to keep it guessing, he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. We have to make it work to find us. Days turned into nights and back into days as we drove. The world outside a blur of landscapes that seemed both familiar and alien. We hid in old barns, abandoned buildings, anywhere that offered a temporary respite from our relentless pursuer. And all the while, the entity was there, a dark shadow on the horizon, never quite losing us, never quite catching us. It was a game of cat and mouse, a battle of wits and wills, and we were in it for our lives. The road twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, landscapes bending and warping as if mocking our futile attempts to escape. Mountains turned into gnarled, twisted shapes, and the desert seemed to breathe, the very sand reaching for us like hungry fingers. What's happening? Lucy screamed, terror in her eyes. It's changing everything, Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I feared it might break. We have to keep going, Mom urged, her face pale, her eyes wild. We have to find a way. The cosmic being was relentless, its dark presence looming ever closer, its malevolent power transforming the world around us into a nightmarish terrain. Look out! I shouted, as a sudden chasm opened in the road, a gaping maw that seemed to beckon us. Dad swerved, the car careening wildly, but it was too late. With a terrible crash, we were thrown from the road, the car a twisted wreck. We stumbled out, battered and bruised, our minds reeling from the horror. It's coming, Grandpa said, his voice filled with a terrible resignation. It's here. We looked back, and there it was, a dark storm of terror, its formless shape roiling and churning, its very essence a nightmare come to life. We have to run, Dad said, his voice cracking. We have to find shelter. But there was no shelter, no escape from the entity's horrifying power. It was upon us, and there was nowhere to hide. We ran, our legs fueled by pure terror, our minds numb with fear. But it was no use. The entity played with us, toying with our fear, drawing it out, feeding on it. Mom was the first to fall, her body twisted and contorted in ways that defied nature. Her screams a sound I would never forget. Mom! Lucy wailed, but Dad pulled her away, his face a mask of horror and determination. We have to keep going, he said, his voice hollow. We have to keep going. But there was no escape, no respite from the cosmic being's relentless pursuit. Lucy was next, her body torn apart, her death a brutal testament to the entity's malevolent power. Dad! I screamed, but it was too late. He was gone, taken by the entity, his death a gruesome end to a terrifying nightmare. I was alone, the last of my family, the last to face the entity's horrifying wrath. I ran, but I knew it was futile. The entity was toying with me, drawing out my fear, savoring it. I stumbled and fell, the world around me a twisted, nightmarish terrain, the very ground reaching for me, hungry for my fear. I looked up, and there it was. The cosmic being, its dark presence a terror that defied understanding, its formless shape a nightmare that had no end. I knew then that there was no escape, no hope. I was its prey, and it would have me. I screamed, a sound of pure terror, a sound that was lost in the dark storm of the entity's malevolent power. And then there was silence. I stumbled back to civilization, a lone survivor, my mind reeling from the horror I had witnessed. When I finally reached a town, I was met with disbelief. The authorities, friends, anyone I tried to tell about the cosmic entity and the nightmare along US Route 50 simply shook their heads. "What are you talking about, son?" the sheriff asked, concern in his eyes. "There's nothing out there. We've patrolled that road, and there's no sign of your family or any disturbance." "But you have to believe me!" I pleaded, desperation in my voice. "It was there! It took them! It took all of them!" They searched the route, of course, but found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no sign of the terror that had unfolded. The desert was as it always had been, its secrets buried beneath the shifting sands. Days turned into weeks, and my insistence on the reality of the entity only served to isolate me further. The connection I felt to the cosmic being, the part of it that had fused with my very soul, was something no one else could understand. I was a curiosity, a sad story, a boy who had lost his family and his mind. Finally, with nowhere else to turn, I was taken to a mental institution, my story dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized mind. But I knew the truth. I knew what had happened, what I had seen, what I had felt. The entity was real, and it was a part of me, a dark stain that would never wash away. I would sit in my room, staring out the window, the memories of the horror playing over and over in my mind. The therapists would come and go, their words meaningless, their understanding limited. They didn't believe me. No one did. I hope you enjoyed our episode. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to you, our brave listeners. Your presence in this shared journey into the unknown is what fuels our stories. Your fascination is our motivation. Did this episode send chills down your spine? Then leave your comments, your thoughts and theories, your own midnight mysteries. Your feedback is the beacon that guides us through the uncharted territories of our stories. And if you haven't already, remember to subscribe to our channel. By joining the Midnight Mystery family, you won't miss out on a single chilling tale. As a subscriber, you'll be the first to know when a new episode lurks around the corner, ready to pull you back into the shadowy depths of the unknown. This is the Midnight Mystery signing off, leaving you with a simple reminder. When the clock strikes 12, fear the silence, for that's when our tales come to life. Good night, Midnight listeners, and remember, not all who wander into the dark are lost.